Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at Franz Kafka's The Castle, and we're going to be exploring some excerpts that you sent to us about this. For those who haven't read it, The Castle is a novel about K, a land surveyor who arrives in a village. And he's supposed to be working for this mysterious castle, but actually getting to the capital, understanding it. Well, that's where things get a little sticky.
It's interesting, right? Because it's like you said, a book from over a century ago.
Yeah.
And it still has this power over people today, I think.
Yeah.
It's because he really tapped into some like universal human experiences and feelings that just transcend time. This idea of being an outsider.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I'm not just in a like, hey, I'm new to this town, this new place kind of way, but like really struggling to figure out where you fit in a system that doesn't make sense. I think
Yeah.
we can all kind of relate to that.
Yeah. And right away, Kafka throws us into that feeling with K's arrival. He shows up late. He's mistaken for somebody else. Even getting a good night's sleep is like a challenge.
Right.
It's almost as if he's alienated from the very beginning.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we're going to see throughout the whole story, that sense of alienation.
Mhm.
But it's also about something, I think, a little deeper than that. I think what Kafka's doing here is playing with these ideas of existentialism.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me a little bit. What does that mean, like in plain English?
Yeah, so basically existentialism is this idea that there's no like inherent meaning or purpose in life. We aren't born with this predetermined role to play, right? Like, okay, you're supposed
No.
to do this or be this. And so it's really up to us as individuals, to create our own meaning. But that can be a little daunting, especially when you feel like the world around you is absurd or doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to the castle itself, right? This like huge imposing structure that represents authority, but is also kind of shrouded in this mystery. K is desperate to get there, to try and understand its workings, but he's constantly thwarted by bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. And this is something that Kafka really digs into in The Castle. All the lost files, the conflicting information, the endless paperwork. I mean, it's all so absurd, but sadly so relatable.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Think about any time you've had to deal with like a large institution, those endless phone menus or online forms that go nowhere. I think Kafka captures that feeling of being stuck in a system that's just designed to make you feel small.
Yes, like you're just a number,
Exactly.
a case file, not an actual person.
Yeah.
And you actually highlighted a passage here where K is trying to get in touch with someone in the castle, and he just can't get a straight answer.
Right.
It seems like he's constantly just running into these roadblocks.
And that's the thing about bureaucracy. It often becomes so focused on rules and procedures that it loses sight of what it's even supposed to be doing in the first place. So instead of serving people, it ends up just serving itself.
Yeah.
It becomes like this machine that can be incredibly frustrating and, oppressive, I think you said.
Yeah. So we have K, this outsider, struggling to find his place. He's trapped in this web of bureaucracy, and he's searching for meaning in this absurd world that's dominated by this castle.
Right.
I mean, it's no wonder he's having a bit of a rough go.
And yet, despite all of that, he keeps going. And he's even offered other positions,
Right.
like, just settle into village life, kind of assimilate.
Right.
But he is so fixated on this castle. Why do you think that is?
I think he's convinced that the castle holds the key to understanding, his purpose in all of this, like his role.
Yeah.
But I think it might also be about power in a way.
Okay.
Is he seeking power within this structure, or is it something else?
Ooh, that's a really great question. And it gets at the heart of what Kafka's exploring here, this very complex relationship between an individual and authority. Like, what is he looking for? Is he trying to gain power within the system? Is he trying to subvert it? Is he just trying to understand it? And, we see that play out in different ways throughout the novel, and we'll unpack that a little bit as we go deeper into some of these excerpts you've shared. And, talking about power, you highlighted this really striking passage, Amalia's story. It's like a stark example of what can happen when an individual tries to challenge that authority.
Right. She refuses the advances of Sortini, an official from the castle. And the consequences for her and her family are devastating. They're ostracized. Their reputation's just ruined.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
It is, and it raises some like uncomfortable questions. What are the limits of like individual resistance against a system like that that's so powerful? What are the costs of standing up for what you believe in when those beliefs clash with the people in charge?
It's like even if you're in the right favorite, challenging authority can have serious consequences.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how power operates. not just through force, but through social pressure,
Right.
and even through the control of information.
Absolutely. And we see that in the way that the villagers talk about Amalia and her family, how these rumors spread,
Right,
and how their version of events is just completely dismissed.
right.
It shows how power can be used to shape narratives and to silence anyone who disagrees.
And that ties back to what we were talking about with the bureaucracy.
Exactly.
The way that these systems can dehumanize individuals and make them feel so powerless.
Right.
But there's also this element of hope that kind of runs through the novel,
Yes.
even in the face of all this absurdity and despair.
That's a really important point. Because despite all the challenges that they face, many of the characters still cling to this hope. You know, like Barnabas, the messenger.
Right.
He believes in his work, and he sees it as a way to connect with the castle,
Yeah.
to get some recognition.
And you actually picked out this passage where he talks about getting a new suit, like an official suit,
Yes,
as if that's going to give him some legitimacy.
exactly. And it really begs the question, like, is this hope misplaced? Is he fooling himself into thinking that he can somehow bridge this huge gap between the village and this castle?
Right.
Or is there actually a chance for him to connect, to find some meaning in this system that seems impossible to understand?
It's like he's going through this labyrinth,
Yeah.
just searching for a way in. But the rules are constantly changing.
Right.
And the paths are all obscured.
Right.
And then you have these messengers like Barnabas who seem to have some kind of access to the castle,
Right.
but even their role is shrouded in all this mystery.
The messengers are so fascinating because they're in this in-between space.
Yeah.
They're between the village and the castle.
Right.
They're carrying these messages back and forth, but we never really know what they're actually communicating. Are they telling the truth? Are they distorting things? Who are they serving? The castle, the village, or are they just out for themselves?
And that ambiguity just feeds into the overall sense of uncertainty.
Right.
Like we're never quite sure who to trust, what to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Even Kay, our protagonist,
Yeah.
he's not always a reliable narrator.
And that's completely intentional.
Yeah.
Kafka isn't giving us any clear answers or easy solutions.
Right.
He wants us to explore the questions, the complexity of being human in a world that feels absurd and unknowable. He wants us to think critically, to question things, and to really just sit with that uncertainty.
Yeah, and that idea, questioning assumptions, not taking things at face value, that feels particularly relevant today, don't you think? I mean, we live in a world where we're bombarded with so much information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's so hard to tell what's true and what's not.
Yeah, and I mean, Kafka was right at a very different time.
Right.
But his work speaks to our modern anxieties about information overload, about the erosion of trust, and the challenges of just navigating a world where power structures are everywhere, but they're also kind of invisible.
Right. It's like he's giving us this framework for thinking about those challenges.
Right.
Like to question the systems that run our lives
Right.
and the narratives that shape how we understand things.
Absolutely. And even though The Castle is often seen as a very bleak and pessimistic book, I think there's also this like dark humor there.
Oh, yeah.
The absurdity of the situations, the bureaucratic jargon, the characters' futile attempts to make sense of it all. It's kind of funny.
I could see that, especially in some of the dialogues that you've picked out.
Right.
Like that scene where Kay is talking to the village mayor,
Yeah.
and the mayor keeps getting sidetracked by these little details, these tangents that just go nowhere.
Yes.
It's frustrating, but it's also amusing.
Right. And I think that humor is important because it keeps the book from feeling like it's reaching. It lets us engage with these really serious topics like power, alienation, the search for meaning without being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Kafka's inviting us to laugh at the absurdity, but also to recognize that that absurdity is often a reflection of our own lives.
And you're right, there is this element of the tragicomic in his writing.
Yeah.
The characters are in these impossible situations.
Right.
Their struggles are both poignant and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yet there's this tiny bit of hope that sticks around.
Yeah.
This refusal to give up completely.
Exactly. And I think that's ultimately what makes Kafka's work so relevant, even now. He captures these human experiences in a way that is both timeless and timely. He speaks to our deepest fears and our greatest desires, and he reminds us that even when things seem absurd, there's always a chance to find meaning, to connect, and even to find some humor in it all.
Wow, it feels like we've just scratched the surface here, but unfortunately we're already coming up on the end of our deep dive.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else in the excerpts that you sent that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, there is one more thing I wanted to touch on. It's interesting that you chose to highlight that final scene where Kay receives what seems to be a message from Clam, one of the officials from the castle.
Yeah, it really stood out to me because it felt like it could be a breakthrough for him.
Right.
But the message itself is so vague,
Mm.
it leaves us wondering, is this real progress for Kay or just another dead end?
Right. And again, that ambiguity is so classic Kafka. He's not going to give us those easy answers or tie things up neatly at the end.
Right.
He leaves us with more questions than answers and kind of forces us to grapple with those implications.
And it just makes me think, what does that message even mean? Is this really the castle communicating with him, or is it another one of those bureaucratic runarounds?
Well, I think it can be interpreted in multiple ways.
Right.
And that's the whole point. He wants us to consider those different interpretations, to really understand that language and communication is inherently uncertain.
So even though this seems like it could be a turning point for Kay,
Right.
we're still left with this lingering sense of doubt.
Yeah. Like he's trapped in this in-between space,
Yeah.
never able to fully grasp the truth or achieve what he set out to do.
I think that feeling of constantly searching, never quite arriving, that really is the core of what Kafka is trying to portray here.
Yeah.
It's about that struggle to find meaning when the world just feels absurd and indifferent.
And you know, that resonates so much even today. I mean, look around. So many people are searching for answers, for some sense of purpose.
Right.
In a world that feels increasingly complex and overwhelming, it's almost as if we're all trying to reach our own versions of the castle.
Exactly. And even though Kafka doesn't give us any easy answers, I think there's something oddly comforting about his work. He acknowledges the challenges we face, the absurdity, the anxiety, and it kind of validates those feelings of being lost and uncertain.
It's like he's saying, hey, you're not alone in this. This
Yeah.
is just part of what it means to be human. And there's something kind of reassuring in that.
I agree. There's something freeing about admitting that it's all a little bit absurd.
And even though his work can seem pessimistic, there's that little glimmer of hope in the fact that his characters, like Kay, never really give up. They keep pushing, keep looking for something, even when it feels impossible.
And maybe that's what we can take away from this as readers as well.
Yeah.
To be okay with the questions, the uncertainty, and to keep searching for meaning, even when it seems just out of reach.
Absolutely. To find the humor, the humanity, and all the struggle, and maybe most importantly, to remember that the journey, the act of searching and questioning, can be just as meaningful as actually finding what you're looking for.
Wow. Well, that was quite a journey. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the castle. It's been such a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
It really has. Thank you for sharing these excerpts and for your insightful questions.
We hope this has given you some new perspectives on Kafka's work and maybe even on your own experiences. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening.